Hi everyone, I'm Andrew and I've always been the caretaker here. Stephen King's The Shining and Stanley Kubrick's controversial adaptation are among the most influential pieces of media in horror history.
That's odd. Usually the blood gets off at the second floor.
So, needless to say, expectations are pretty high for the sequel, Dr. Sleep. But before we check back in on a grown-up Danny Torrance, we wanted to look at the origins of the Overlook and its impact on the genre. Where was the story originally set? Why did Kubrick throw away King's script? And what made King return to the story after nearly 4 whole decades? Give me the bat, take your medicine, and follow the bouncing ball, because this is the true story of The Shining. Before the sequel, before Stanley Kubrick, and yes, even before Ready Player One, The Shining was simply an intriguing new novel by an up-and-coming writer. So let's begin with the book. By 1974, the career of Stephen King had really started to take off. The long-struggling writer had finally hit it big with his first novel, Carrie, going from starving artist to superstar nearly overnight. King followed it up with his influential suburban vampire story, Salem's Lot, before his next work. He wanted to expand his horizons beyond his backyard. Hard to believe, but back then, King didn't want to be typecast as the dude who set all his stories in small-town Maine. So he opened up an atlas, ask your parents what those are, and flipped through randomly until he landed on Boulder, Colorado. King and his family packed their things, schlepped across the country, and checked into room 217 of the famous Stanley Hotel on October 30th, 1974, just as it was closing down for winter.
My God, this place is fantastic, isn't it, hon?
Sure is.
The Kings were the only guests, and as they sat alone in the vast ballroom of the fading landmark, eating dinner as the staff cleaned up around them with canned orchestra music echoing down the empty hallways, Steve knew he'd found the perfect setting for a story he'd been kicking around called Darkshine. His original idea centered around a psychic kid trapped in a haunted amusement park, inspired by the famous John Lennon lyric, "We all shine on." He transplanted Darkshine to an old hotel in Colorado and infused his own struggles with alcoholism, his absent father, and his gnawing, deep-seated fear of giving into anger and hurting his kids.
Well, I dreamed that I killed you and Danny. But I didn't just kill you. I cut you up in little pieces.
King finished the book in a mere 4 months, and when it was published in 1977, The Shining cemented his reputation as America's premier horror author. Today, it's a given that pretty much anything he writes will be turned into a film or TV show, but back then, it was a big deal when one of cinema's most accomplished auteurs took on the task of making the movie. Stanley Kubrick was far more established than King when he first stumbled across The Shining. The director already had 2001, A Clockwork Orange, and Dr. Strangelove under his belt, but he was coming off one of the biggest bombs of his career, 1975's Barry Lyndon. It's a snooze fest. So for his next film, Kubrick decided to do something a little more commercial. He had always dreamed of creating the world's scariest movie that would play upon the nightmare fears of the audience, and after turning down both The Exorcist and its sequel, he locked himself in his office with a stack of popular horror novels. According to legend, Kubrick's secretary could hear him constantly chucking rejected books at the wall, until one day, the thunk stopped. And when she went in to check on him, she found Kubrick deeply engrossed in The Shining. The director still wasn't the biggest King fan. He considered his writing weak and didn't even look at the screenplay the author submitted himself. Instead, he teamed up with writer Diane Johnson to transform the story from the tale of a good man succumbing to inner and outer demons to a clearly crazy person driven past the brink by isolation and angry spirits. We did a video all about Kubrick and King's different visions that you should go check out. But no matter what the two artists thought about each other, the 1980 film stands on its own as a bona fide masterpiece of modern horror. And we're not just saying that. That's my favorite movie of all time. Watch The Shining. It's not my favorite of all time. That was kind of an oversell. But it's definitely my favorite horror film of all time. Robert De Niro, fresh off Taxi Driver, was considered for the role of Jack Torrance, but Kubrick didn't think he was psychotic enough. Robin Williams auditioned, but he was a little too extra in his Robin Williams way. Eventually, he landed on Jack Nicholson, a rising star who had already proven he could play crazy.
Oh, goody, goody, here it comes. Oh my God, don't stop now!
Creating the Overlook itself was even more crucial than the cast. Kubrick chose not to use the real-life inspiration because the Stanley was actually a fairly pleasant-looking place on camera.
It is a great hotel.
Instead, Kubrick created his own immortal interpretation of the Overlook. For the exteriors, Kubrick selected Oregon's Timberline Lodge, while the interiors were built as massive sets at Elstree Studios, the same soundstage where the Star Wars trilogy was shot. Kubrick created a vast, empty hotel that was simultaneously a cramped, claustrophobic maze with impossible architecture and a layout that doesn't make any sense in the real world. If you watch that movie and you see how the hotel's laid out, it doesn't make any sense. The blazing lights required to create the illusion of a whited out winter through the windows were so hot that the set actually burned down near the end of filming, which I'm sure came as a relief to the stars of The Shining. After all, Kubrick was a notorious perfectionist, and he subjected his cast to brutal conditions. They'd spend 6 weeks rehearsing a single scene and over 13 hours shooting it, going through take after take after take after take until the director was satisfied.
Yes, one more, one more, we'll work our way through.
Going through take after take after take after take until the director was satisfied. The grind drove Nicholson nuts and brought Scatman Carruthers to tears. How dare you? But poor Shelley Duvall, she got the worst of it. Kubrick made the on-set experience as unpleasant as possible for her, forcing dozens of retakes and stressing her out to the point where her hair started to fall out. I mean, I guess it helped bring out the despair and terror in her performance, but that's no excuse for torturing the people, especially the women who work for you.
And it is 25 to 1.
Well, I don't sympathize with Shelley.
Kubrick's treatment used to be held up as a romanticized example of a meticulous artist driven to perfect his craft, but these days it's a stain on the film's otherwise impeccable legacy. The Shining premiered on May 23rd, 1980, just weeks after the first Friday the 13th. Horror cinema was quickly becoming the domain of sleaze and slashers, but The Shining proved that prestige and premium quality could still make an impact.
Great party, isn't it?
King himself clearly wasn't a fan, as we all knew, and the critics were lukewarm, and it was definitely a slow burn at the box office, but as it slowly grew in success, The Shining came to represent a very different kind of horror. The film is almost a pure exercise in aesthetic. The terror doesn't come from the characters you care about or even gruesome gore. It's all about unnerving visuals and meticulously composed imagery rife with symbolism seen, unseen, and sometimes even felt, that over the years has sparked intense and occasionally oddball analysis.
You know, this one's a little harder to find, but there is definitely a photograph of Stanley Kubrick in one frame, airbrushed in to the clouds.
From fake moon landings to minotaurs, fans of The Shining have spent decades dissecting every frame of the film in desperate search of meaning, as shown in the spectacular documentary Room 237 and about 15,000 thumbnails consisting of red arrows and red circles. And can you blame them? It's not like there was a deluge of Shining sequels and tie-ins to obsess over. Sure, there was King's own made-for-TV remake, but the less said about that, the better.
Way to go, Doc.
I love you guys.
See? It's okay. You saw it on the television.
Fans demanded to know more about what happened to Danny, Wendy, and Dick Halloran after The Overlook, but direct sequels aren't really King's style. Don't get me wrong, he's famous for sharing characters and settings across his works, but outside of well-defined series like The Dark Tower or the Bill Hodges trilogy, he doesn't usually revisit his stories so directly. This may come as a shock to you, but The Rage, Carrie 2, Pet Sematary 2, and Children of the Corn, 2 through 10? There are 10 Children of the Corn movies?
Careful what you wish for.
None of those were in fact based on King novels. Dr. Sleep is, and you can thank King's constant readers for the follow-up. At a talk with director David Cronenberg in 2009, King told the audience he was kicking around the idea for a Shining sequel inspired by a news story about Oscar, a cat who lived at a hospice and can sense when people were about to pass on.
It seems Oscar not only has 9 lives, but also a 6th sense about death.
Later that year, he ran a poll on his website to determine what he should write next. Either a side story in the Dark Tower saga or Dr. Sleep. Sleep barely edged out The Wind Through the Keyhole, which he ended up writing anyway because he's Stephen King. And in 2013, we finally learned what became of Danny Torrance. Dr. Sleep is a divisive book, and it's definitely not as good as The Shining, but also it's not really trying to be. Any other way, the movie by Mike Flanagan is going to be very different. When it comes to The Shining, the book and film are as inseparable as the Grady twins, 2 drastically different visions that have become forever entwined in our shared psyche, and in attempting to reconcile both, Dr. Sleep might finally be able to bury the hatchet.
Here's Johnny!
Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Do you think Dr. Sleep will be a worthy successor to The Shining, or is it doomed by the high expectations set by Kubrick's film? Leave a comment, let me know. Please subscribe to Now This Nerd. And if you see Lloyd, tell him he's the best goddamn bartender from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine. Or Portland, Oregon, for that matter.